This morning, it's a pleasure to have Paul Fricke with us from the University of Wisconsin. And Paul, we were chatting a little bit before. Sounds like you had a great weekend in the woods.
I did. Went up to the Northwoods. Some buddies of mine and our sons. We went grouse hunting and actually got a few. So
excellent. And now a great start to the week. A Monday morning podcast. So obviously, you are very well recognized in the field of reproduction and reproductive physiology. And I think what's really unique about your background is both at the producer level, so very practical application of technologies, of synchronization programs and recommendations, and also from the scientific community in terms of research and publications. Can you maybe give the audience a little bit of a background of your specific program and then the overall program at the university, which is obviously well recognized also?
Sure, Mark. And again, thank you for inviting me to do this podcast. I'll go back to the very beginning. I grew up on a dairy farm in eastern Nebraska where my dad and my uncle farmed with my grandfather. We milked about 60 Holstein cows. So I think that's one of the big credentials I use when I go out and talk to dairy farmers. They probably like to hear that more than all of the educational background stuff. But anyhow, yeah, so I grew up on a dairy farm, milking cows, went to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for my bachelor's degree, on to University or North Dakota State University for my master's and PhD. I spent a couple years at the Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska. Did 2 of the 3 studies in my dissertation there. And then ended up coming to Wisconsin in 1995. And I did a postdoc and came to Wisconsin to work with Dr. Milo Wiltbank. And so if you look back, 1995, that's the first publication of the OVSYNC protocol, which was a big shift in, I think, scientific thinking and had a practical management tool. In 98, I took my faculty position. Then I was able to compete for the faculty position at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We were a dairy science department. In 2000, we merged with animal sciences. We've got a really strong dairy group. Good group of us working in specific disciplines within dairy. And so my academic appointment is between research and extension, specifically with dairy cattle reproduction.
And Paul, I'm glad you pointed out, because there was something I did want to mention for those in the audience who aren't aware, the original OVSYNC protocol came out of the research of the Wisconsin group, Dr. Milo Wiltbank and Paul's other colleagues. So that's quite a recognition for the university and the team there at the university. So, given that, fast forward to today and many changes in terms of not only synchronization programs and lots of variations or tweaks on those, the technology that we have available now with activity monitoring and so forth. What are some of your areas of interest and focus currently?
Yeah, so I like to tell the story during the pandemic. The pandemic hit. I remember sitting in my office and I said, they're gonna close down my office here at work. So I put up the home office. Had a master's student at the time. She's now my PhD student, and I told her, I said, well, we've got some time. We're going to write a USDA grant, and we got that funded. And so a big focus of my PhD students' research is on optimizing use of sex semen in dairy cattle, so in heifers as well as lactating dairy cows. So that's my PhD student. I also have a master's student right now. We're very interested in embryo transfer. Right now, she's working on a project where we're transferring IVF Angus embryos into lactating Jersey cows on a commercial dairy here in Wisconsin. And so we can talk about both of those areas. I think they're kind of exciting areas that are up and coming and that people are starting to ask a lot of questions about.
Well, that sounds like an excellent area to start some conversation. As you know, our partners within dairy health are feedlot health. So, our extended group, we're working both in calf ranches, feedlot and dairy, and it's something that we're actively involved in a lot of discussion. So it would be great to get more of your insight on that. I guess one question that maybe to start is, In terms of embryo transfer technology, obviously, many years ago, at least before my time, AI became a new technology, and now is obviously across the board commonplace and rare to find bulls on herds. What do you think are some of the limitations why embryo transfer hasn't become as mainstream or adopted in commercial herds as AI?
Yeah, I think the big limitations with embryo transfer right now are number one, cost. You can make a lot of genetic progress with artificial insemination, and semen is relatively cheap, and we're relatively successful with semen-based programs. Albert DeVries down at the University of Florida has done some nice work just looking if you're going to genetically improve your herd, driving the female side from the embryo transfer, you have to get those embryos cheaper than they currently are. The other limitation would be pregnancies per ET is relatively low, especially in light of what we can do with semen-based programs coming off of fertility programs like double OVSync. It's amazing, Mark. We can get half our cows pregnant at first breeding if you put them on a double OVSync for first breeding. You're going to get half of that probably with pregnancies per ET, so you're going to take a big hit at first service there. And then the other big limitation with embryo transfer, these embryos aren't normal, so they do have higher rates of pregnancy loss. And one of the big things that my student Natalia is working on is we're trying to figure out if there's a way that we can reduce pregnancy loss or increase pregnancies per ET when we do embryo transfer in lactating dairy cows or heifers.
So it sounds like some exciting opportunities for the future with development within research and new technologies.
Yeah, and I'll just comment. I mentioned what we're doing in this Jersey herd. So, and we'll come back to this. The use of sexed beef semen has dramatically increased, and this is an interesting story because you talked about the original OVSync program back in 1995. When Wiltbank and Pursley developed that protocol, what it did to improve reproduction. So if you go back and you think about the 21-day pregnancy rate, 21-day pregnancy rate is driven by two other rates: the service rate or the insemination rate, the rate at which you can put semen into cows, and then pregnancies per AI, which is how many cows that you actually breed get pregnant. OVSync only improved the service rate. So it was just simply a way to get semen into cows. So by breeding more cows, more aggressively, more times, that had a tremendous impact on 21-day pregnancy rates. And one of the things that I'll say about Dr. Wiltbank, my colleague, my former mentor, he didn't stop with OVSync. OVSync itself was a revolutionary idea in just understanding the basic biology and how to manipulate it. He looked at the original results with OVSync and said, yeah, okay, it's a service rate program. How do we turn this into a way that we can actually increase fertility in these lactating dairy cows? And so over about a 20-year period of time, and this is some of the research that I've been involved with as well, we've learned that we can pre-synchronize cows, for example. We can deal with anovulatory cows better. And so those are the two kind of driving ideas behind, say, a more complex program like a double OVSync program, which is basically two OVSync protocols back to back. And then the big shift came with understanding that the rate limiting step was lack of complete luteal regression, which is where we got the second treatment of prostaglandin in the second OVSync. When all that fell into place, and I don't know if you saw this, Mark, we just saw fertility pop in these herds. And so we've been able to turn these programs into fertility programs. They not only increase the service rate, they can improve the pregnancies per AI as well. And so what happened in the industry is that all of a sudden, when we went from 14% 21-day pregnancy rates, we've got herds, Mark. I gave a talk about 10 years ago that I called 30-30.
I recall that.
How to get a 30% pregnancy rate in a 30,000 pound herd. And my idea at the time, the goal for 21-day pregnancy rate, the pie in the sky goal was 20%. And so I kind of wanted to reset the goals and saying, look, we can get much better than 20%. However, within a very short span of time, relative time, 5 to 10 years, these farms just shot by 20%. 40 is the new 30, Mark. I mean, I was at World Dairy Expo whenever it was 2 weeks ago. And I had 3 different farmers that I know in Wisconsin come talk to me and said they're hitting 40% 21-day pregnancy rates. It's just it's just absolutely phenomenal. So it's not just the fertility program. Another big talk that I've been given, Mark, is this whole concept of the high fertility cycle. And that's simply the notion that if you get your cows pregnant in a timely fashion, they don't have long days in milk. They don't get fat late in lactation. If you calve fat cows, they lose body condition score early in lactation, and they have terrible fertility, even on a fertility program. So the combination of those things really is what is driving these high preg rates. And so what happened very quickly is we started to overproduce replacement heifers. And that was a tremendous mind shift, I think, that had to take place with a lot of farmers. Before, nobody would have sold heifers. You talk to people and they just say, we got to keep all of our heifers because you can't
money in the bank.
Money in the bank. You can't ever have too many heifers. Well, guess what? We overproduced heifers. Heifers are now worth less than it costs to raise them. And so basically, if you look at the last about 5 to 7 year period, we've seen a dramatic increase in use of sex semen in lactating cows, which we never saw before, because now we've got really high fertility, and we can tolerate this slight reduction in fertility of using sex semen in lactating dairy cows. And then, so another technology that came along was genomic testing. So if you know your genetically best cows, you can calculate how many replacements you need. You're going to use sex semen to generate those replacements. And then you have all these cows that you want to get pregnant because you want them to return to lactation, but you don't need the replacements out of. So people were using sex semen now pretty aggressively in lactating dairy cows. And I think that's what you're talking about, Mark, in Torreon. I mean, now we're seeing calf ranches. I mean, 10 years ago, Mark, you wouldn't have probably seen, and I'm imagining those are a lot of crossbred dairy beef animals that you're seeing in these calf ranches.
In the U.S., yes. In Mexico, that's evolving. Yeah. Still many Holsteins, okay, but that's certainly evolving. Yes.
Yeah, I was just out. I mentioned the embryos. Simplot is the company out in Idaho that's producing these Angus embryos. We were just out there. My PhD student and I had a meeting and got to tour one of the biggest feedlots in the U.S. About I think there's 130,000 head there. About half of them are dairy beef crosses. We also went to a 50,000 head calf ranch. I think all those calves are crossbred calves. They're either Jersey or Holstein crosses, a lot of Wagyu crosses in there as well. And, I think the most impactful thing that I saw when I was there is that 10 years ago, none of that would have existed because, we really didn't have the fertility in these lactating dairy cows. So it's been really fun and rewarding to see how quickly this has shifted and how the industry has started to really adjust and start to better deal with this. And so our objective with sex semen is that, and this is another thing we need to talk about, Mark. If you look at randomized controlled trials, and I know farmers' eyeballs roll back in their head when I say randomized controlled trials, but if you flip a coin and say this cow's going to get bred to sex semen and this cow's going to be bred to beef semen. So if you randomize or not beef semen, sex semen. So conventional semen versus sex semen, you get about 80 to 85% of the fertility of conventional semen with sex semen. There's always a reduction in fertility with sex semen. Now, I get into arguments on farms because if you just go to your dairy comp file and look at semen type, break it down by semen type, a lot of times sex semen is as fertile as the conventional semen, but nobody is taking into account which cows they're breeding with sex semen. They're breeding their youngest, most fertile animals and the earliest services with sex semen, and then they switch over to another semen type. So they don't see it in on-farm records, but there is a reduction in fertility with sex semen. So we're just looking at ways to try to deal with that. And one of the first studies my student did when she was a master's student, we worked with 3 different heifer growers here in Wisconsin, farms that have heifers on site, and randomized those heifers to a treatment where we just gave prostaglandin when they were moved into the breeding pens and then watch for heat. We think that's probably the way a lot of heifers are managed. And I think a mistake that farms are making is they're trying to use sex semen in the same way they'll use conventional semen. And if you do that, if you give prostaglandin when you move them into the breeding pen, you'll catch a lot of those heifers in heat. You can do once daily tail chalk, and you can breed a lot of heifers to normal fertility with conventional semen. Doesn't work as well with sex semen because the margins are tighter, and you have to be better at your timing of insemination relative to ovulation with sex semen. So the other treatment we looked at was setting those heifers up on a 5-day cedar sync protocol, just a standard 5-day cedar sync that you would see recommended by the Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council. And if you just look at fertility, we gained 7 percentage points on pregnancies per AI with the timed insemination using sex semen in these heifers. So you get better fertility. So it was small amount. 7% isn't completely small, but it's not a huge difference. The big difference is though the days on feed, and that's really the cost of raising heifers is days on feed, and days on feed is determined by when the heifers get pregnant. So by forcing the issue and synchronizing that group of heifers and getting semen into them, not only did we get 7% percentage points higher pregnancies per AI, we saved a bunch of days on feed. And if you do the costs, when I talk to heifer growers, nobody wants to spend money on heifers up front, and those synchronization protocols are not exactly cheap because they involve a cedar and 3 treatments. And so, but we do the economic analysis. You're about $17 a head per pregnancy by being more aggressive with your heifers with sex semen. So that's an example of how we're trying to look at systematic ways to improving how we use sex semen in an operation to make that better. So that was the heifer trial.
Okay, and Paul, that's $17. That's the net benefit after per pregnancy.
Per pregnancy.
Okay. Then is that both reduced days on feed and then earlier productive days to first lactate?
It's days on feed, saving days on feed, and the increase in conception rate is basically what that is. And so it pays for the cost of that cedar sync program. That it was like almost $17, $16 in some sense, and that includes paying for the cost of the synchronization program. You're still ahead, and that feed cost, it's a typical thing. It's an opportunity cost. It's a cost that farmers don't see. That days on feed. So, but when you do the math, it's better to be more aggressive with the heifers, especially with sex semen.
Excellent. One comment that you made that really hits home is controlled research, right? And maybe after we talk a little bit more about beef semen applications and technologies, we can go back to that, because I think that's a very common error in the industry is data mining, if you will look at the data, and it's skewed by how we manage the herd, culling and so forth. So I think that, it's a really important point that we do a lot of controlled trials, and they can happen on commercial farms. They take a lot of oversight and compliance, but yeah, those are the things that you're doing, we're doing, other groups to really answer the question and not just say cause and effect. So thanks for that comment.
I think that's great. Yeah, and I think that's great, Mark. I've seen some of your talks that you've done on that, looking at, it's kind of use and abuse of data, actually. And I commend people for wanting to look at data, but I'll tell you what farmers have to get away from is proving that something works in their herd necessarily, because they're not going to normally do a randomized controlled trial, right? So if you really want to answer the question, that's what you have to do. So
Great. So further thoughts then on some of the research you're doing and the practical application of the beef semen programs.
Yeah. So let me cover one other topic with sex semen. We did a study in lactating dairy cows. There were a couple studies that came out, and they weren't very well randomized controlled trials. They're published in the scientific literature. They just looked at these farms had lactating Jersey cows, and they had a heat detection system. So they knew when they came into heat, and they knew when they were inseminated relative to the onset of estrus. Okay, Those are the two things that they knew. So there were no treatments applied. It was just observational. And both studies concluded that based on the timing, it looked like you have to breed a little bit later with sex semen for normal fertility. Okay, so that idea has been around. It's penetrated out. You hear people talking about this. Oh, we got to breed them a little bit later with sex semen. Now, here's what I'll say. That may be true in an estrus situation. And the reason is this whole liver metabolism thing. I don't want to get into the hypothesis of Wiltbank's idea. So high-producing dairy cows have compromised fertility because they have such high feed intake, and that high feed intake causes an increase in liver blood flow, and the liver breaks down estradiol and progesterone. And so what happens in a high-producing dairy cow is at the end of the cycle, the corpus luteum regresses, but because the liver is metabolizing the estradiol from that follicle that's growing up, it takes longer for that cow to come into estrus. And so what we've done is we've turned a cow with an average cycle length of 21 days. It's about 22.5 days now. And that increase in the cycle is at the end, after luteal regression, until the cow ovulates. And so in high-producing dairy cows, yeah, it might look like you need to breed them a little bit later. What we decided to do was to look at this within a situation where it was more controlled. So we did it within a timed insemination program. And so it was a double ovsync program, first lactation Holsteins, 3 different farms. And what we did is a little bit odd. We changed when we gave the last GnRH treatment, because the breeders wouldn't come out to farms. The right way to do that trial is to either breed at the right time or delay breeding, right? But that was a non-starter on these large dairies. The inseminator simply wouldn't come back. Yeah. So exactly. They're just going to come at one time. And so what we did is we normally what we do in a double ovsync program, that last GnRH treatment is given in the afternoon, and then you breed the next morning. And that gives you a 16-hour interval from induction of ovulation with GnRH till the timed AI, which is about perfect because they're going to ovulate about 24 to 32 hours later. So that's our control treatment. What we did is we moved that last GnRH from the afternoon to the morning. So we're inducing ovulation a little bit earlier, and now the interval from induction of ovulation to AI is about 24 hours. So we're actually putting semen in about the time they're going to ovulate. And that it's pretty simple. That modification actually decreased fertility. So what I've been telling people, if you're going to use sex semen in first lactation Holstein on a timed AI program, you need to use the standard timings that we've talked about for a long time. Give that last GnRH in the afternoon, breed the cows the next morning. That's about a 16-hour interval between the last GnRH and timed insemination. And the meeting that my PhD student and I were at, Dr. Kearns from Iowa State was there. He's a sperm physiologist and gave some really interesting talks, and we had some interesting discussions. I think with sex semen, the mistake that you can make with sex semen is breeding too early. And if you put semen into the reproductive tract too early, I think those sperm just run out of energy and lose motility and all kinds of things if that interval from when you put the semen into the reproductive tract to when they ovulate. So you want to get the timing of insemination right with sex semen, and that would be with the standard protocol.
Okay. Did you look at other intervals, Paul?
We didn't look at other intervals, and I'll tell you the one thing, anybody who works with science listening to this, we changed more than one thing in that trial. So it wasn't just the timing of insemination relative to ovulation. We actually induced ovulation a little earlier, so probably ovulated a little smaller follicle, may have had a little smaller CL. At any rate, the net decrease in conception rate by our modification was 7 percentage points negative. So don't do that. Don't do that. You want to keep with the standard timing. And then I'll quickly describe what we're doing with this. This is a Jersey herd that we're working with, about a 2,000 cow Jersey herd here in Wisconsin. We set the cows up to be inseminated to first breeding with the double ovsync protocol, or we have a protocol that we use to bring the cows into estrus. It's essentially 2 treatments of prostaglandin 14 days apart. Okay, so what we can do is we can compare pregnancies per AI to a timed insemination at about the same day in milk as to cows that are essentially brought into an estrus at that time. So we're not confounded by days in milk when they're inseminated. And so we had done this before with those very same protocols with conventional semen. This was a herd actually in Portugal, herd of Holsteins. And there was about a 10 percentage point advantage for double ovsync compared to estrus. That's why we call these a fertility program. We did a lot of work in that study. So we cleaned the data up to make sure that only synchronized cows were included, and only cows in the estrus group that were inseminated in a low progesterone environment and then subsequently had high progesterone to make sure that they ovulated. When we cleaned that up, that 10 percentage point advantage still existed for the double ovsync groups. So what we concluded is that whatever double ovsync is doing to these cows, it is intrinsically improving their fertility.
Okay. So even a cow that was in correct hormonal physiological state from a natural estrus, if you will, had lower fertility than a synchronized cow.
Yep. And so that's why I've been calling programs like double ovsync fertility programs, because they do actually, and 10 percentage points in conception rate is quite a bit actually. It's not a small amount. And so now the other thing about double ovsync is you breed 100% of the cows. With the estrus program, and we had heat detection system and KMARs on them, so we were doing as good of a job as we could to catch them in heat. You only catch about 75% of them in heat. So you get killed not only on the pregnancies per ET, but on the service rate side too when you breed to estrus.
So, Paul, not to we'll still get to the beef semen at some point, but I think this brings a really good discussion to how do we position these hormone-based programs, given some public consumer pressure on use of hormones and so forth. Because in this case, there's a benefit. Okay, we could say yes, we can use activity monitoring, we can use other heat detection methods, and quote, some people say get the same results, but this would say that we can't.
Yep. You've asked me the hard question. Okay, so the first thing I always say, if I had a hat on, I'd take it off right now and say, okay, I'm a scientist. That's a bit of a philosophical question, but I think we can deal with it. The first thing I say is, from a biological standpoint, the treatments we use in these programs, GnRH and prostaglandin, do not get into meat. They're short acting. They don't get into milk. They're approved for the use that we use them for. I mean, there's no reason that biologically they're a problem. Okay. The one thing you can say is that, yeah, you're repeatedly giving subcutaneous treatments with a needle, right? So maybe that's an issue. Some farms are getting over that because one of the farms we have here in Wisconsin, they've actually put two people on the rotary parlor, or on the rotary, and they're using those pulse guns. And I don't know if you've seen those, Mark. Yes. Needleless technology. They do it because they want to stop like leukosis, which is transmitted by reusing needles. But also, I think it's less hard on the cows. They did an interesting thing. They put pedometers on the workers that were responsible for going out to the pens to find these cows. I mean, this is like a 5,000 cow dairy. They were walking miles to try to do this. And then, as you know, Mark, the problem with the programs, you got to give the right stuff to the right cows on the right day. And if you can't do that, you compromise the results. When you work through pens on a farm, if you get to the end and you've got cows that were on your list that you can't find, what do you do?
Yeah, you're not going to go find. Yeah, and perhaps is the best thing in terms of disrupting all the cows to not go find them.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. All cows go through the parlor. All cows go through the parlor. So I think that the compliance is much better. It's a beautiful system, and I think it's a way forward with regard to the problem of the needles. Okay. Now let's get back to the programs and the perception of the programs. There's no doubt that the programs work. There's no doubt that they improve profitability for farmers. I don't think what we talk about enough, Mark, is the benefit to the cow herself. And there's a couple things that I can speak to with regard to these programs. High producing dairy cows, another interest of mine is twinning, double ovulations and twinning. So twinning is going up in the dairy cow population. It's because of this liver metabolism with increasing milk production. So we're changing the endocrine milieu around the time the follicles are selected, and we're selecting 2 follicles. And we've done some interesting work where if we force cows into a low progesterone environment when we start an off-sync program, we increase double ovulation rate from 10% to over 30%. So it's probably, so if you put a cow on a double off-sync program, you should theoretically decrease her risk of twinning. And as you know, Mark, twinning is bad for cows and bad for calves. I think cows that twin probably are culled at least a 20 to 30% rate. And so it's good for cows to put them on a protocol like this, especially if they're at risk for twinning. The other thing that I spoke of was the high fertility cycle. And so cows that get pregnant in a timely manner, okay, if they get pregnant at the end of the voluntary waiting period, they have less total days in milk. They do not spend too much time in late lactation where they gain a lot of excess body condition score. They calve at a lower body condition score, which means that they don't lose as much body condition, which means that they have much better fertility the next time around. We looked at in a study, Persley's done one of these studies. We have one. There's more and more of these studies that are coming out. We split cows into whether they maintained or lost or gained body condition just in the first 21 days post-calving. Cows, here's a misconception. Not all cows lose body condition, okay? Some cows maintain. In other words, they don't change in that 21-day period, and some cows actually gain. Cows that maintain or gain have much higher fertility than cows that lose. If you set up cows to calve when they're too fat and they lose body condition, even on a double off-sync protocol, it was like you've seen those data, Mark. It was 25%, I think, for the cows that lost. It was 50% for the cows that gained, and probably in the 40% for the cows that maintained. Cow, and here, let's just bring this in. You're a veterinarian. So what happens to cows that lose condition, right? They get
metabolic disasters.
They get metabolic diseases. They have DAs. They're a train wreck. Okay. So I think what I would like people to start thinking about and focusing on is the benefits to the lactating dairy cow of these programs that very successfully get them pregnant in a timely manner. I think there's animal welfare issues, the twinning issue, and avoiding those metabolic disasters. So I guess that's one of the ways that I'm trying to discuss that question, Mark. I probably get that question as much as any. And the other thing I'll add to this, when I started in my position probably 25 years ago now, farmers used to look at me and say, just give me a way to get my cows pregnant. I mean, I got to get my cows pregnant. I mean, farmers knew intuitively you have to get your cows pregnant in order to make money in the dairy industry. Now we have a safe and effective and FDA approved way of getting cows pregnant. And it's like that we can't do that now. That's not right. There's some problem with this, right? So it's come full circle. And a lot of people, including my former student Julio, who's at Cornell, who you've worked with, are really working on these technologies, these automated activity monitoring systems. I think those are beautiful systems. And I think the rumination, when that came with them, I think those systems are here to stay. We're seeing lots of farms in Wisconsin adopt those systems. But I'll tell you, Mark, people that try to stop doing a double off-sync program for first breeding come to me and say, wow, what do I do to get my fertility better to estrus? It's like, come on, we spent 20 years figuring this out. We know what the problem is. We know we can fix it. And so many of these farms that have these systems, and I think, Mark, the most powerful way to get cows pregnant quickly, if your goal is to get a high 21-day preg rate, if that's your goal, coming off a fertility program for first breeding, you get 100% service rate at the end of the voluntary waiting period, and you'll get half of your cows pregnant, okay? Then use your system to catch those cows coming back into heat. That is your earliest non-pregnancy diagnosis. You can breed those cows back. They're going to have lower fertility, but you're going to get that lower conception rate earlier. And then when they get to the preg check, the open cows get resynchronized. And those farms that do that are probably 50% timed insemination breedings and about 50% estrus breedings. So another thing I've been focused on, Mark, is combining these technologies. What is the best way we can put all these things together to get the highest 21-day pregnancy rate? And I think for a while I saw people saying, well, I bought a heat detection system, I don't want to synchronize cows. Well, you're not going to, that's fine. Okay. I'm just going to tell you, you're not going to have as high of a pregnancy rate as if you put those two technologies together.
Well, that's great to hear, Paul, because really that's what we've been focusing on is combining those technologies and to maximize the fertility cycle. I think what's also interesting is you bring up, the injections or injection technology. I know there are some groups, you mentioned Julio Giordano and others, working with other methods of administering hormones. Okay, if that's intravaginal or some automated devices that can potentially manage an entire sync program with one application of some device. So I think it's really cool to think of future opportunities in those areas.
Well, again, back to the beef semen. Beef semen. Beef semen. So what we did in this Jersey herd that we're working with, 2,000 cow Jersey herd, we've got cows set up for first breeding on those protocols I described before. It's either a double off sync protocol or it's that protocol we use to bring the cows into estrus at the same day in milk. So here's the kicker. The farm determines the mating. Okay. I would love to do a study where I could randomize cows to beef versus sex semen, because people ask that question. Nobody's going to let me do that. Okay. Because people want to breed their worst cows with beef semen and their best cows with sex semen. So the farm determined the mating. So within each semen type, we have cows that are bred with sex semen to estrus or double off sync, and beef semen with estrus or double off sync. And again, in both cases, double off sync is about 7-8 percentage points higher in pregnancies per AI compared with estrus. And then the other thing that I would say, I've heard people, and I don't know if you've heard this. I'd be interested to hear what you think, Mark. Some people complain about the fertility of beef semen. We did not find that to be the case. I mean, coming off a double off sync program, and the cows mated to beef semen are more older cows at higher services. We were hitting like 55% pregnancies per ET with beef semen. I think the perception that beef semen is less fertile or has fertility problems may be a hangover from when we saw this real shift about 5 years ago in the industry, when people were scrambling to get beef semen. Any black sire, I'll take it, right? And so I think they were cleaning out tanks, and they had all kinds of garbage semen that was out there. The AI companies have really stepped up their game, and they're really doing a nice job with quality control and getting really good sires and getting that beef semen. So I don't think there's any problem with beef semen compared to Holstein, conventional Holsteins. Okay.
And we would agree with that, Paul, from the data that we have internally. So excellent. So a lot of what you've discussed here, and I really like your synopsis of looking back, years ago, and not too many years ago, where your average or maybe a goal of pregnancy rate was above 16 or 17 or that 20, and where that is today. And I remember in my early career, working with some of those herds, trying to get them to 20. And now, a herd of today, if you're at 20, you need to really do something to step it up real quick. But through all this, what about the cow of today versus the cow even 5 years ago? This discussion has come up quite a bit within our group as we look at really metabolic disease, ketosis, and subclinical ketosis for that matter, and some of the cut points for subclinical versus clinical. We have cows now that genetically are different, higher producing cows, and maybe they can manage through some of these BHB levels. How do you think that also equates somewhat to the change in the fertility cycle of the cow of today, if you will?
Yeah, we've really had two kind of concurrent, simultaneous revolutions in dairy cattle. One is the genomic revolution. Okay. And there's no doubt that the genomics, that whole technology has just been a game changer as far as the cow is concerned. I mean, we can now select for we have kind of like an a la carte. I want a Holstein cow that does this and this and this and this, and we can just select for that, right? And so we're in the early stages of that. We've also had a reproduction revolution with the high fertility cycle with fertility programs, and we're just seeing these sky high 21-day pregnancy rates. It's to the point, Mark, when I teach class on campus, I kind of get excited and rant and rave. We see herds with 30, 35, 40% preg rates, and these kids are going, meh, so they don't realize how bad it was. They haven't been alive. They haven't been alive long enough. So I try to go back to that and give them a little bit of that perspective. So has the cow changed? Now, I'm going to make a comment that maybe some geneticists don't like. Milo and I published a review paper, where it's the Council on Dairy Cattle Breeding has been doing a nice job keeping track of data now. And so if you look at the trend for days open from 1955 to 2000 was just going up. Okay. And of course we want lower days open. Lower days open is better fertility. So fertility is getting worse. And at the same time, the phenotypic trend for days open is coming down. So we're selecting for other things, right? During those years, we're selecting for more milk production, more components. We're not selecting for fertility. In 2000, that days open graph just took a trend back down. It's an amazing graph. So what's happened with the phenotypic trend for days open is it's flattened. Okay, so the geneticists have stopped the massive decline, but the increase or the decrease in days open can't really be explained in large part by an improvement in genetics. I'm not saying genetics isn't important. I'm not saying we're not going to be able to select for fertility. We should be doing those things. What really changed in the last 5 to 7 years was a dramatic increase in the phenotypic value for cow conception rate. It's just gone through the roof. And it's because of fertility programs. It's because of the high fertility cycle that we've seen that dramatic increase. So again, I'm not trying to say that the cow's not different. I think that they are. Another thing that I would like to bring into this discussion, Mark, when reproduction got really good, I realized early on that farmers were going to figure out that they can set their herd turnover rate. Herd turnover rate was basically determined by available replacements, okay? And now that you can produce more replacements than you need, it used to be set at about, we had a 42% herd turnover rate in Wisconsin for many, many, many years. And that, I think, was just the ability at a 14% preg rate produce that many heifers to replace. And that pretty much maintained herd sizes. Well, now that we've got all the heifers we need, and you can determine how many you're going to breed with sex semen, I can say, wow, maybe I don't want a 42% herd turnover rate. Maybe I can get that lower. And so I think that we are getting that lower. I'm seeing herds, and this is a bit, we can have a discussion about this. There's people who are arguing that, no, we shouldn't have a 30% herd turnover rate because you want more replacements to make those culling decisions. But yet, when you do achieve a 30% turnover rate, you have a more mature herd that's closer to their mature equivalent. I always tell my students, mature equivalent as a number doesn't mean anything to me if your average lactation length is 2.5. They're not hitting their mature equivalent, so who cares what that number is, right? But if you can get that herd turnover rate down, graduate these cows into higher lactations, you're going to have a much higher producing herd on average. And so my point with this, Mark, to come full circle here, is that I think the groups of animals that we have coming through are different, because now we're using sex semen to produce these heifer calves, and we're doing culling of these heifers. The sick heifers aren't even getting culled, aren't even making it. They are getting culled. And so I think that, and when I was a kid, we basically starved our calves. They got a quart of colostrum whether they needed it or not. Now we're talking 2 gallons. You're trying to stuff these baby calves full of colostrum, high quality proteins. We can get the heifers to grow. And so I think we're looking at a very different animal coming through our systems now. And yeah, maybe, I don't think we even really know the implications of what that has for fertility on those animals, but I think it's got to be positive, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and certainly we've seen that in over the short term of working with some herds nutritionally and making benefit or improvements, and then the real improvement starts to come with reproduction and with better heifers. Really, you get to a certain point, and then the next advances really come repro and replacements.
Yeah, it's been such I would say a rewarding and exciting time to be involved with reproduction. I just think before ObSync, a person who worked in reproduction said, watch for heat better. I mean, that's pretty much the only thing we had to offer. Use some prostaglandin, right? Use prostaglandin, watch for heat. And now we've developed these tools, including the activity monitoring systems, including fertility programs, the concept of the high fertility cycle. We've just seen the fruits of 20 years of kind of this innovation and the data that's come through. And now, we're seeing herds 30-40% preg rates. The decrease in the herd turnover rates. I think we have healthier herds, Mark. I think we have healthier cows. I think it's just been a very exciting time to be involved with reproduction and see what's happened to these to the dairy industry and the herds.
Yeah. Oh, I would certainly agree. Some great discussion today. Well, Paul, as we wrap up here this morning, I'd really like to thank you. But DCRC, for those of you who are less familiar, Dairy Cattle Reproductive Council meeting is coming up really in less than a month. And any little promotions you can give there or tidbits of what folks to expect. For those who haven't attended that meeting, I'll say I think early bird registration is still on, but one thing that's always really enticed me about that meeting, it's a great mix of the dairy producers, industry folks, veterinarians, and university researchers and so forth. And that's, I think, really unique. A lot of other meetings are more focused to one group or another, and it's a really nice mix of folks there. So any comments as we wrap up for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that plug. I was involved in the leadership of Dairy Cattle Reproduction Council. I was there at the first meeting when that was formed, like 14 years ago now. Two of my former grad students were served as president in the organization, Julio being one of them, and Glaucio being the other. And it is a great meeting, and it is a good mix. I mean, a dairy farmer can go and get something out of it. A veterinarian can go and get something out of it. There's really a nice mix of stuff being presented there. Breakouts, plenary sessions. I believe Jack Britt is going to be there. I didn't memorize the program. I'm giving a talk on the optimizing use of sex semen. So I'll be going through, it's in a breakout. I'll be giving that talk twice. And so it'll go through all the data that we have that I described with use of sex semen, how to optimize that. And it's in Madison, Wisconsin this year, so it's right in my backyard. I get to sleep in my own bed at night, rather than traveling, so that's good. But it's a good location. We usually get a lot of good walk-ins and drive-ins because we just have so many farmers and veterinarians right here in proximity to it. So looking forward to that meeting. So thanks for bringing that up. Appreciate it.
Great. And Paul, you mentioned the different management strategies for giving injections and so forth. I know Don Niles is also on the program, and certainly we'll be speaking about, would imagine, both the needleless technology and then alternative management strategies for giving injections, if you will, in other programs. So great. Yeah, so we'll look forward for those who can attend. I also believe there's a virtual option. So.
Yep, they poll. Actually, they'll take the top rated talks and invite each speaker to do a webinar over the next however many months, and so those are available on the web too. I encourage people to become members. It's a great organization.
Great, agreed. Well, Paul, I really appreciate your time today. Some great discussions. We could take any one of these and continue down a different avenue, but I think you've given the audience here a lot to think about. And we'll look forward to having you back again.
Thanks for inviting me, Mark. I really enjoyed it.
Okay. Have a great day.